Hello, and welcome back to On Bach's Time, His Life in Music. We're into week 3 of 6 installments on the life and times of Johann Sebastian Bach, and we're live streaming from the Saskatoon Symphony office. We are on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional territory of the Cree peoples and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We pay our respects to the Cree and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. Many thanks to Matthew Praxis for handling tech and fielding questions. I'll be answering them at the end of the class. Today, we'll talk in detail about 2 monumental works by Bach, the St. Matthew Passion and St. John Passion. But first, let's look at the city of Leipzig and Bach's appointment as cantor of St. Thomas and director of choir and music in the city. Leipzig was well known as a center of trade and learning. From the 12th century on, it had established regular trade fairs, and by the 15th century, it had become the marketplace of Europe. Leipzig was originally a Slavic settlement called Leipzig, meaning place of the linden trees, and was located at the intersection of many important trade routes. By the 18th century, Leipzig University had grown into one of the most distinguished universities in business and mercantile economy. Combined erudite environment was mutually supportive. By the beginning of 1900, Leipzig entered a vibrant period of unprecedented economic growth and affluence. And by the middle 8th century, the city had become the intellectual capital of Germany. There was a bourgeois recognition of higher culture in the air, a greater interest among the prosperous class, elegant coffee houses, and the city would see the emergence of bourgeois gallantry, the cultivation of excellent manners and sophisticated fashion, which in conjunction with the frequent fairs, likely earned the city its nickname, Little Paris. There were also 2 local music societies in town. One was named the Collegium Musica, and the other was a newer society founded by Telemann. Let's have a look at what Leipzig looked like back then. Here is a map. This is an engraving by Matthias Scudder from 1723. That's the town hall in the center. St. Thomas's Church is located just below center around 5 o'clock. St. Nicholas Church is just above center, 1 o'clock. And then there's St. Paul's University Church to the right. And the best pizzeria is right over, just kidding. And here's a closer look at 2 of the main churches Bach worked in. These were spacious 3-aisled and late Gothic halls. So here we have St. Thomas Church on the left and St. Nicholas on the right. We remember from the last class that many candidates were considered before Bach for the prestigious position as cantor of St. Thomas and director of choir and music. Among them was George Philipp Telemann, who was more famous at the time. Telemann declined the offer, however, which prompted one town council member to report, since the best man could not be obtained, lesser ones would have to be accepted. The cantor of St. Thomas had formidable duties, which included supervising music for the main 4 churches, those being St. Thomas's, St. Nicholas, St. Paul, and the new, capital N, new church, as well selecting and training choristers for these institutions, and writing music for church services and special ceremonies, such as weddings and funerals. At age 38, Bach was accepted for this amazing post, and Leipzig would be his home for the last 27 years of his life. Here he composed the majority of his sonatas, as well as the major choral works, the Masses, Passions, and the Magnificat. So on May 22nd, 1723, the former princely Kapellmeister of Köthen and his family arrived in Leipzig with 2 carriages at 2 o'clock to move into a newly renovated apartment in the St. Thomas School. This was big news, reported by the Hamburg newspaper. A new cantor and music director was in town. And so Johann Sebastian and his wife, Anna Magdalena, arrived with their entire family, their 5 children, including the newborn Christina Sophia Henrietta, which was Anna Magdalena's first child, and Fridelina Bach, their sister-in-law. and they moved into the renovated cantor's apartment, which extended up 3 floors. In addition to the regular duties of the cantorship, there was the expectation of Bach to play a crucial role in reshaping the city's musical life. The town council had specifically sought to hire a famous man to fulfill this role. The most prominent musical activities took place every Sunday and on feast days at services in the 2 principal churches of St. Thomas and St. Nicholas. Bach also assumed responsibility for many musical functions at the university. On May 30th, which was shortly after Bach's arrival, he produced his first Leipzig cantata, Die Elenden sollen essen, which is BWV 75, or in English, translates to The Miserable Shall Eat. He wrote this for the morning service at St. Nicholas Church. While the autograph score suggests it was possibly written still in Köthen, Bach, however, definitely wrote its sister work, the cantata Die Himmel erzählen die Ehre Gottes, BWV 76, or The Heavens Are Telling the Glory of God. He definitely wrote this one in Leipzig. The 2 works have a similar layout and instrumentation, with 1 trumpet, 2 oboes, strings, and continuo, and all 4 concertos of the choir participating in arias and recitatives. Let's listen to how Bach formally introduced himself to his new post. Here is the opening chorus from the cantata Die Elenden sollen essen, performed by Philipp Herwege and the Collegium Vocal Gent. It was reported that Bach's music was met with considerable applause. Now let's hear the end of this opening chorus to have a bigger picture of the work. Sometimes I feel this kind of hypnotic effect with those running, chasing 16th notes. And I think it sounds like he was pretty happy with this position, his new position. So it's interesting that Bach was the first cantor at St. Thomas to focus exclusively on the music education of the upper classes at the school. He invested more in private vocal and instrumental instruction and in rehearsal times than any of his predecessors. For the music instruction of the upper classes and in private lessons, Bach used no textbooks apparently, and instead he formulated his own principles and rules of theoretical subjects. Practical examples from the vocal and instrumental repertoire were also a focus. A former student of Bach's and a successor as a cantor, Johann Friedrich Dölles, would in fact frequently use Bach's motets for regular choral exercises. And it's quite likely that Bach himself established this practice. A motet is a short piece of sacred choral music, typically polyphonic and unaccompanied. Let's listen to one of Bach's motets. This is Singet dem Herrn ein neues Lied, Sing unto the Lord a new song, a BWV 225, here performed by the Monteverdi Choir, led by John Elliott Gardiner. What a beautiful combination of these soaring lines and rhythmic buoyancy. When Mozart heard this motet by Bach, he wrote on his copy, "A complete orchestra should be added to this." Mozart was quite enthusiastic upon hearing a surprise performance of this motet during a visit to the St. Thomas School in 1789. At his request, Mozart was given a copy of the score, and there's an account by a musicologist by the name of Johann Friedrich Rochlitz, saying that Mozart even shouted, "Now there's something you can learn from." This 8-voiced motet was intended for a double choir and had the option of instrumental support or not, with the movements in various forms, 8-part concertos, a 4-part aria, and 4-part chorale in juxtaposition, as well as a 4-part fugue. The motet was really an educational opportunity for Bach's students in the vocal techniques and genres. Bach most likely wrote it as a choral exercise to prepare the choir for his much more demanding cantata repertoire. Bach's 5-part chorale motet, Jesu meine Freude, BWV 227, Jesus My Joy, would have also been a sensible combination of a chorale exercise plus theological instruction. It features highly interpretive word-tone relationships throughout and shifting configuration of voices. The movements are variously in 5-part, 4-part, or 3 parts. Since the standard motets of the earlier curriculum were insufficient to prepare for the challenges in Bach's cantatas, it was necessary for Bach's new motets then to keep the pupils challenged and engaged. And also to keep the choristers on their toes, there was a stiff system in place, likely installed before Bach's cantorship, a system of fines to discourage the students from muddling a performance. For a noticeable mistake, they would be fined 1 groschen and 3 groschen for a deliberate mischievous mistake. This money was subtracted from their extra income earned at funerals and services. And the cantor would then allocate the money towards buying new scores and towards instrument maintenance. Under his contract, Bach was obligated to instruct in both vocal and instrumental music. The large amount of instrumental music by Bach that was copied out suggests that Bach's ensemble works, as well as chamber music for 1 instrument and harpsichord, plus concertos and overtures, were written for pedagogical purposes as well. He had grown used to a high performance standard in Weimar and Köthen, which he wished to expand on. The works Bach wrote in Leipzig had sonorities extending past established conventions and offered a greater richness of form and style. Over his 27-year tenure, Bach engaged in a total of about 1,500 performances of cantatas, oratorios, more cantatas. Each performance meant an audience of more than 2,000 at a time. After about 6 years in the office, Bach found himself in a commanding position with influence in both sacred and secular musical organizations in Leipzig. In 1729, an important shuffling took place, and Bach would claim for himself the directorship of one of Leipzig's important music societies, the Collegium Musicum. He was also involved in coordinating and promoting organists in town, and his powerful stature in the city and his reputation beyond the region was growing. And so he received honorary titles at various courts in Köthen, Weissenfels, and Dresden. He was becoming nearly invulnerable and perhaps maybe ungovernable. Before Bach officially began his Leipzig career, he must have made the decision to provide the two main churches with his own works. Unlike many of his predecessors, who were all composers, once Bach was in the city, he embarked on programming a piece of concerted music, specifically a cantata, for every Sunday and feast day of the ecclesiastical year, with the exception of the Lenten weeks before Easter and Christmas, when concerted music was just by tradition suspended. This endeavor required 60 cantatas per year, and during the first few years must have been a tremendous task. Yet in this way, Bach was able to gradually build up a plentiful cachet of music and materials for the coming years. While Bach's duties extended to all musical components of the service, his major effort and personal interest was centered on the cantata. Bach selected text to a cantata and then prepared it to be published into booklets, which the congregation could read. The instrumental ensemble available to Bach as cantor and music director was comprised of a core group of 8, and these were salaried members of the town music company. This was insufficient for performing a cantata, so Bach was involved in judging the auditions for positions into the group. The auditionees were often town musicians who were expected to have a range of skills, and this is apparent from the flexible instrument assignments we see that Bach had made. The stability of the core group of 8 allowed Bach to shape their playing to suit his standards. Bach himself expressly characterized the challenge of a high performance standard when he wrote in 1736 that the concerted pieces that are performed by the first choir, which are mostly of my own composition, are incomparably harder and more intricate. These pieces were more technically and artistically demanding, and there was the additional challenge of the quantity of music to learn and prepare. Having to learn a new difficult work week after week was a relentless task that no previous cantors had set out for his musicians before. Of the first 5 annual cycles of cantatas that Bach wrote starting in 1723, at the beginning of his cantorship, only the first 3 cycles have been transmitted in a recognizable and intact form. Therefore, with the 4th and 5th cycles considered lost, it's difficult to analyze the complete evolution of his cantatas through this most productive cantata period of writing cantatas, being the 1720s. However, what emerged are his 2 aims. First, to create a considerably sized working repertoire from which he could draw on in later years, and to set goals per cantata, which allowed him to explore, experiment, and to push the limits of this flexible genre. Furthermore, Bach's projects, the experimentations within and the use of his compositions in the church services were actually connected to his intention of modernizing church music in Leipzig. And the operatic scope of the oratorio, the genre that are his passions, to modernize. And perhaps the crowning glory of this humble composer is found in his passions. On Good Friday in 1727, nearing the end of Bach's 4th year in Leipzig, he presented at St. Thomas's Church one of the greatest masterpieces of the Baroque era and of sacred music, and well, of all time. This was the sacred oratorio, the Passion according to St. Matthew, BWV 244. What is a passion exactly? In Christianity, this refers to the short final period of the life of Jesus Christ. The four canonical Gospels describe the following events from Jesus' entry into Jerusalem to the Last Supper, his arrest and trials, culminating in his crucifixion and death, burial, and then to his resurrection, which is observed on Easter Sunday. An oratorio is a large-scale musical work with voices and orchestra. Typically, the narrative is on a religious theme and is performed without costumes, scenery, or action, as it would be in an opera or at the theater. Examples of oratorios include Bach's Christmas Oratorio, Handel's Messiah, and Haydn's The Creation. The Passions by Bach were performed at the Vespers on Good Friday. So how does the Passion fit into the Good Friday service? The service begins with a hymn, then proceeds to part 1 of the Passion, then the sermon, followed by part 2 of the Passion, then a motet and collect and benediction, and then a final hymn at the end. The St. Matthew Passion represents the pinnacle of Bach's vocal works during his cantorship. Even Anna Magdalena, his wife, referred once to it as zu große Passion, the great passion. The outsized dimensions and form, the technical mastery, the powerful and poignant expression, such sophistication were new to sacred music at the time. We see a buildup in the 4 years prior to composing this Passion. Bach was immersed in the Cantata-a-thon, their composition and weekly performances, and there are 2 other works playing an important role in the conceptualization and creative design of St. Matthew Passion. And these are the Magnificat of Christmas from 1723 and the St. John Passion of 1724. The Magnificat was Bach's first large-scale work for the main churches in Leipzig. It was performed during his first Christmas season in his new home city. Interestingly, at Vespers services in Leipzig, the Magnificat was sung in German on regular Sundays, but performed in concerted form and in Latin on high feasts. We'll have to hear it another time, in another class, I mean. The St. John Passion is the older of the surviving Passions and was written during Bach's first year in Leipzig. It is scored for a 4-part choir with soloists and an instrumental ensemble of strings, basso continuo, a pair of flauti traversi, which are the standard flute we know these days that are held up horizontally, and for oboes. Bach also incorporated other instruments for special colors, which we'll look at in detail a little later. Before Bach's time in Leipzig, at the morning service on Good Friday, the 4 main churches would follow their long-standing tradition of singing the St. John Passion in non-concerted style, so not an oratorio. This was a 4-part polyphonic setting by Martin Luther's musical advisor, the Wittenberg cantor Johann Walter. But the cantor of St. Thomas at the time, Johann Kuhnau, liked this historical version. In 1721, there was a report about Kuhnau, how on Good Friday, the Passion was performed for the first time in concerted style. And this work mentioned was in fact Kuhnau's St. Mark Passion, however, of which only a fragment survives today. But nonetheless, from this fragment, we can glean that it was a valid model for Johann Sebastian Bach. Kuhnau's Passion focused on the biblical narrative, unchanged, distributed among the soloists and chorus, and there would be interjections by hymn, strophes, and pensive lyrics. The structure of this large-scale work was divided in 2 parts, one performed before the Vespers sermon and one after, just like Bach. Bach's own St. John Passion was first scheduled to be performed on April 7th, 1724. For this Passion, Bach needed vocal and instrumental ensembles larger than that for his cantatas or the Magnificat. Looking at the instrumental ensemble, he saw that additional forces were needed, more musicians, to enlarge the strings and to provide dual continual accompaniment, thus requiring harpsichord and organ. For the ensemble to achieve sonorities evoking the pathos and the expression demanded from the biblical narrative, Bach would require the transverse flutes, viol d'amore, viola da gamba, and the lute. This would provide the richness of timbre, color, and range to bring the text to life and to express the lyrical reflections upon it. Since the Leipzig consistory had a requirement to adhere to the biblical passion text, Bach did not have the option to use the pre-existing text, such as the then famous 1712 libretto by Barthold Heinrich Bruck's, which swaps in rhymed paraphrases of the story. On a side note, the libretto means the text of an opera or any long vocal work. The rhymed paraphrases form of libretto was used, though, by Telemann, Handel, and many more composers. So instead, Bach set out to assemble texts to complement the biblical narrative, taking the Gospel of St. John as a point of departure. He structured the entire Passion around the design of the biblical narrative, resulting in a compilation of individual poems from publications by Brock's, Christian Weiss, and Christian Heinrich Postel. In this way, Bach worked along the lines of the 17th century Passion layout, in which the text served as the structural backbone. Author Christian Wolff notes, the musical disposition of the Passion clearly suggests that Bach based his composition on a close reading of the biblical dialogue and its literary structure. It was relatively recent, for Bach anyway, in the year 1724, that the Good Friday Vesper service had become the musical highlight of the year. The sermon had become almost a mere interruption between what was essentially a musical service. Now, this event of the year was in Bach's hands and to be defined to some extent by him. I'd like to look at one aria from part 2 of the St. John Passion called Es ist vollbracht, or All is Fulfilled, which were Jesus's final words on the cross. This aria is a spiritual high point of the Passion, and we'll listen to an extraordinary, moving, and historic recording with the singer Marian Anderson. Her contralto voice is stunning and just wonderfully supported by the tender and beautiful cello solo, here played by Samuel Houston Mays, the principal cellist of the Philadelphia Orchestra at that time. Marian Anderson broke the color barrier with this recording, as it was the first time an African American had been invited to perform with a major symphonic orchestra. The cellist Mays was a Cherokee Indian, and remembering the forced displacement regarding the Cherokee Nation, he had intensely identified with the sorrow of this execution. With similar awe and unbridled emotion, he inspired and was inspired by Miss Anderson in this highly moving prayer of Jesus as he was dying on the cross. We'll listen to a beginning of this and then a little bit later jump to the Allegro. every time I hear this aria, it resonates a little stronger. So the title and the first line of text is Es ist vollbracht. The translation from the King James Bible is It is finished. However, neither German nor the English version does justice to the original Greek tetelestai. And tetelestai conveys the idea of a deal closed. In 1st century Anatolia, modern day Turkey, where John's Gospel was written, if you called the plumber to fix the sink, after you've paid him, he would write on the invoice or just say to you, tetelestai. This is to mean paid in full. Jesus' last words are not really saying the end, but rather, I've done my part. And so the theological meaning of Es ist vollbracht is important in order to make sense of the Allegro part here that follows. The Allegro's text says, Judea's hero ends his victorious fight. So there we've just heard the cello solo abruptly return with the music from the beginning. The ending of this aria is unusually operatic. The cello continues the solo and the voice returns at the final utterance of Es ist vollbracht. And here we'll hear the end. The cello solo before that is a little bit longer. And so sort of evokes a feeling that it's waiting for the voice to close the aria, to close the deal. And just an exquisite moment of meaningful music. And makes it perhaps one of the most original arias that Bach ever wrote. I also recommend listening to 2 other recordings that I've put on the playlist. One sung by Andreas Scholl, and another with a young alto by the name of Panito Ikonomou, and an incredible viola da gambist, Christoph Coin. There were 4 completed versions of St. John Passion before his death in 1750, before Bach's death in 1750. A 5th revision involved a meticulous stylistic overhaul of the whole score. But for an unknown reason, Bach broke off in the middle of the 10th movement, and the work remained unfinished. The complex transformations of this passion give it a freshness, originality, and an experimental radiance, as it's been said. St. John Passion certainly serves as the forerunner of the 2 later oratorios to come, the St. Matthew Passion and St. Mark Passion. However, the St. Mark Passion no longer exists. So Bach's 2 surviving oratorios are St. John and St. Matthew, and only the libretto survives of the St. Mark Passion, which was written by a Christian, Friedrich Heinrich Picander. Bach took note when Picander had published an oratorio text libretto in 1725, and it is likely His refined and agile poetry brought the two Leipzig artists together. The two would closely collaborate, and it became the utmost importance that the gospel texts remain preserved intact, and that the lyrics must capture the theological scope. Um, so moving on to St. Matthew Passion, it was written 3 years later in 1727. From a literary point of view, the St. Matthew Passion is rather more unified, thanks to Picander's rich and complex madrigal style poetry. A madrigal is a freestyle song strongly influenced by the text. There was a notable revision just after the first performance of St. Matthew for the purpose of enhancing the impact of the work and the theme by expanding the performing forces and musical dimensions. And by 1736, Bach made some modifications, including replacing a simple chorale with a larger chorale setting appropriated from the St. John Passion. He also made a clear divide between the two vocal ensembles, Choir 1 and Choir 2, by assigning them separate continuo, the instrumental accompaniment groups. Also notably, he assigned the cantus firmus line, and this is a line of pre-existing melody used as the basis for polyphonic work. He gave this line to a third choir, which is made up of sopranos along with organ support. So all musical resources were mobilized, likely creating a spectacular, unprecedented effect. The use of both organs also did not go unnoticed. The definitive revision of St. Matthew Passion is the 1736 version, given there is no other manuscript score as scrupulously laid out and copied, written in two colors of ink, red and dark brown. The score contains 68 movements, some of great length, and calls for an 8-voice double choir and a well-equipped double orchestra. The biblical material is divided into 15 scenes and 2 introductions, and within these, Bach intersperses hymn stanzas to relate the lyrical meditations. All the lyrics are also introduced by biblical references to illuminate the interpretive function of each poem in order to be immediately understandable. If we listen to the opening of the Passion, we can hear how Bach sets Picander's lament and dialogue, Kommt ich Tochter, come you daughters, in the French tombeau manner, a funeral march type manner. So here is the opening chorus of St. Matthew Passion, Kommt ich Tochter, here led by Sir Stephen Cleobury. So that's the opening of the Passion, setting the scene. One key distinguishing feature of St. Matthew Passion is that Bach intentionally drew on the complete spectrum of forms that were cultivated in sacred and secular music in his day. It is harmonically expressive and colorful as it wanders through keys, and Bach embraces all 12 chromatic pitches in underscoring extreme affects or imagery in the text. Let's listen to some chromaticism in the Arioso, Ach Golgotha, here with the Netherlands Bach Society, led by Van Veldhoven. You can maybe hear those very tight-knit intervals. And let's listen to a bit of that again, some of that chromatic quality. This is from the same arioso. So we hear a lot of meandering and searching in this chromatic texture. So in the death of Jesus scene, a little later, we hear his last words, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That's Hebrew. And in English, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And here, this is harmonically set in B flat minor, 5 flats. And there's sort of a descent of despair evoked by the next step, moving lower to E flat minor with 6 flats harmony. So I'll play some more chromatically moving harmonies from this excerpt. So here's that descent I mentioned. And then with the text, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? But in Hebrew. The gradual unfolding drama of the Passion runs parallel to the unresolving tension between major and minor modes. The opening chorus, which we heard a little earlier, presents this dual modality between E minor and G major and sets the tone for the work. Here are the first few bars that I get to hear. So here you can feel the tension building or the story beginning with these shifting tonal areas and tonal centers. The dramatic tension is partially resolved in the final chorus of the Passion in C minor. The final chorus in C minor of the Passion, but really the true resolution arrives in the radiant major mode 2 days later in the Easter Sunday cantata in a trumpet fanfare grandeur. So let's listen to the opening chorus of Bach's Easter cantata, BWV 66. wonderful. I would love to hear that live. So 3 levels of drama unfold in the Passion. First, that of the main characters involved, Matthew, Jesus, Peter, Judas, Pilate. The chorus heads the crowd, and others mentioned in the text. And then the second level would be from the spiritual community, reflected by various choruses and the chorales. And third, the drama of the individual believer, whose reflections we hear in the arias. Here, Bach is working on a scale found nowhere else in his output, using the double chorus and orchestra, and as well as in some performances, a children's chorus to paint a vivid scene of Jesus carrying the cross. In this scene, the 2 full choruses comment on the procession, acting as a crowd on either side, while the children's chorus sings the chorale, O Lamm Gottes, O guiltless Lamb of God. In the first scenes, Bach presents the listener with a dramatization of the people's responses, how the community and the individual reflect on the narrative as it unfolds. This complexity of form and adventurous use of chorus and soloists is matched by the evocative and detailed writing for the orchestra as well. Many of the work's arias provide powerful examples of Bach's ability to bring solo instrument and the voice together. Bach could create an eerie atmosphere in Ach Golgotha with oboe and cello pizzicato accompaniment, and later take a simple accompaniment in another aria to evoke the chaste expression of the text. However, it turned out that many of Bach's innovations would seem lost on Leipzig's musical audiences. They were in fact used to Passion music sung in plain chant and were left somewhat shocked by Bach. With the structure based on an alternation of recitatives and arias, the people of Leipzig found it too operatic. Though the Passions hardly strike us today as opera, that's perhaps because our understanding of opera has changed. Bach's innovations within the language of 18th century opera are nonetheless what make the St. Matthew Passion a profound, edifying, and deeply spiritual experience. The St. Matthew Passion stands as a universal and timeless monument to his genius. It's truly spectacular, with musical forces, 2 choirs, 2 orchestras, 1 double orchestra, a 3rd choir, and not for a theatrical intent or powerful display, but as music proclaiming a sacred, theological, human, and liturgical character. And it's just a wonder and a joy and gift to listen and hear these oratorios in their complete form when we have a chance. So I think there might be a couple minutes left in the class for questions. Just go back to the webinar. Just a moment. Yes, that's very funny. Perhaps the Saskatchewan Symphony Orchestra could organize the performance of a Bach cantata in Leipzig, Saskatchewan. It's just north of Handel. I love that. Thank you, Brenda. I guess there's also a town of Mozart, isn't there? So if anyone has a question, I would be quite happy to try and answer it. So one question here is how long would the Passion service be? So we know that the Passion itself runs, the part 1 and part 2 would run for 2 hours and 40 minutes, or I see on certain recordings. So guessing with the sermon, depending how long the sermon would be, and the hymns, it would surely be beyond 3 hours. I'm guessing 3.5 to 4. Oh, and we have another question. Here is what is polyphonic? So polyphony refers to the simultaneous use of at least two or more voices. So to be running at the same time, and a wonderful example of polyphony will be heard in the motets, but of course as well a fugue, which has many voices, sometimes interjecting, entering, over, and a lot of overlapping possibilities. There are many fugues that Bach wrote in the preludes and fugues that are, I don't know what are the most amount of voices, but I know at least 5 is almost common in his preludes and fugues. And so I have another question. What works by Bach am I looking forward to performing? Well, a short while ago, I was practicing the chromatic fantasy and fugue, and I would love to perform that. And then as well, I've been also recorded the first movement of the Italian concerto by Bach, and would look forward to a performance of that, definitely, hopefully in the near future. And then I have a question here from Brenda that will answer live. Yeah, I think I should read it first. In your estimation, would the musicianship in people of Bach's time be more adept to handle the complexities of his music better than our current bank of musicians, say just in Saskatoon? That's an excellent question. And I feel like part of it, but the answer may depend on the people and their own musical background. I do know women of a certain class in Bach's time were all playing keyboard and learning keyboard works. So they were definitely exposed to counterpoint and not necessarily working on Bach's music. Sometimes they might prefer music in the galant style, which is a bit more accessible, Bach being fairly intellectual and complex. But I think it would just depend as someone is learning the keyboards, a keyboard instrument, and hopefully starting Bach young, which they do in the Royal Conservatory of Music. You have works by Bach and Corelli right away. So that would be hard to sort of compare, but I think our own time was pretty adept at it. So I have another question incoming, perhaps. And I could definitely continue answering the question, what works by Bach? I'm looking forward to performing. And those would definitely include more of the preludes and fugues and the rest of the Brandenburg Concerti and the keyboard concerti are wonderful. I've played the F minor. The D minor is the famous one. And there's so many. We start thinking about the partitas, the partita in C minor number 2. I was obsessively listening to the Capriccio, which ends that partita for some time. And here we have another question from Tonya. So the question regards to the German tablature of music that I had shown in the first class. The question is about would there be different tablatures in different European nations or empires? And when did the change come about to one similar style that all could read? So that was in Bach's time where they brought in the standard Western notation. But because he had written many works in the German tablature, it was considered old-fashioned, and that's why some of those works were actually not preserved. Whether there are tablatures in other nations, I don't know very much about, but I would love to find out. And now my curiosity is piqued. So I'll do a little bit of research. Thank you, Tanya, for that question. I'm also looking forward to performing more of the Bach gamba sonatas. Um, and those are really wonderful. Uh, so if there aren't any more questions, I will bid adieu and look forward to class 4 next week. So thank you everyone for attending and your thoughtful questions. See you next week.